Okay, it looks like we have a decent number of people, so I think it's a great time to get started. So you'll notice we're doing a few things on this. We have a chat going. Please feel free to have a little bit of a conversation between myself and Melissa. We'll attempt to do a little bit of moderation. Apologies if anyone sees me looking at different monitors. There's a few things going on in front of me, and I want to make sure I'm getting all the seeing everything that's going on. And you'll also notice that we've launched a poll. We'll launch a few of these at different times, maybe a couple at the beginning, a couple at the end. With this large number of attendees, it's a great opportunity to maybe collect a little bit of information on what everyone's thinking right now. So I would just like to start out and say welcome. We've mentioned the chat. On behalf of Plastarc and Bala Consulting Engineers, we hope that you enjoy this conversation. It's been a long time coming for us, and one that started well before this discussion, this event today. But we expect to continue well after this, and depending on how well this goes, maybe we'll look at turning this into a couple more discussions. Some quick housework. Just to keep up to speed here, this is a AI accredited session. There is one continuing education credit that comes with this. During registration, there should have been an area where you could put in your AIA information. For anyone that didn't do that or would like to get credit, please feel free to reach out to Tanya, and her email address is there on the bottom of the screen for you. We'll make sure that by the end of the week, we'll get everyone either the certificate or confirm that credit was submitted to AIA. Kind of along those same lines, we just thought we have to mention the course description and some of the learning objectives. And look, this is a great opportunity to make sure you're in the right webinar. There's been a lot of them recently, and I know that somehow and sometimes they get a little confusing. But we'd like to step back for a bit before we get into the conversation with our panelists today, and have a little bit of a discussion on how we got to where we are. So first, an introduction. My name is Matthew Easold. I'm the Director of Digital Planning at Bala Consulting Engineers. Bala is a multidisciplinary engineering firm with a unified MEP, structural commissioning technology group. And our practice is focused on the built environment. So we have 5 offices from Boston to DC, and just around 200 staff total, with offices in New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, headquarters in Philadelphia. Our real focus is on coming up with creative solutions to connect our end users that we work for to the spaces that they work and live in. My role is lead conversations just like this one with our clients to help understand how technology reinforces the purpose of a space, and to really make sure that that connection between the physical, the user, and the digital is complete, no matter where you are. Melissa, would you like to provide an introduction?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for having all of us together, Matt. Really appreciate that. I am Melissa Marsh. I lead an organization called Plastarc, which is committed to social research and people analytics for the built environment. So really figuring out what is that experience in space that we have. Matt and I actually ran into each other a little over 10 years ago, working on a future of office project for Brookfield in their own space. So it was great to see him pop up again when we had the opportunity to start working on this, and specifically to start looking at the impact that technology was having in this unique COVID moment, how we're using it for room booking, space booking, people tracking, smarter building systems, and all of that. I also have a role of leading the occupant experience discipline at real estate firm Savills. That's an organization in which we're really advocating for the future of workplace from a tenant and landlord perspective, really in the thick of it from a real estate transaction perspective. I'm also delighted to, Matt, this is when I'm going to introduce our panelists as well. Is that correct?
Sure, go for it.
So I'm particularly proud to have three amazing women on the panel, and it's not even a panel about a women's topic. It's just really focused on the future of the workplace experience post-COVID. And we're committed to not talking to you just about how we're going to go back into the workplace, but really how we're going to go forward into a future workplace, and the things that we're really going to have change, or the things that are really going to start to be different or emergent trends in the future. And to have us think about that, first we have Krista Sinker, Senior Director of Campus Planning at Comcast. She has a background in architecture, planning, and technical design. Early on in her career, she began working with organizations like GlaxoSmithKline and Merck, having an inherently wellness-based characteristic, really seeing that personality and that care between the design of the building and the occupants of that building. More recently, she's been utilizing resources across departments and external partners at Comcast in order to, quote, turn campus master planning and project management into something of an art form. So we look forward to hearing more about that. Then my former colleague and friend, Evelyn Lee, is Senior Experience Designer at Slack. She has a really rich background in architecture, a Bachelor of Architecture degree with a minor in global studies, always bringing those people and buildings together, and has more recently completed a Master's of Public Administration and a Master's of Business Administration out in her region in San Francisco in the Bay Area. She is widely published, and I would say just an extraordinary advocate, always looking for ways to make the world better through architecture, but also for architects, really being an advocate about in the architectural industry. And then last but definitely not least, we have Abby Becker, who's Customer Success Manager at Comfy. In that experience, she's really got her ear to the ground and understanding what our current clients currently experiencing, what's going on in the world. She thrives in customer-facing environments, and also, like much of many of her colleagues at Comfy, she's super dedicated to solutions and sustainability design challenges. She enjoys helping clients leverage technology to transform their workplaces, and that really is the center point for this conversation today. So please help me welcome, maybe a little virtual clap here, our three fabulous panelists who are really going to help us understand a little bit more of what the future looks like post-COVID. And actually, that's where I'm going to start with the first question, asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves, anything that I missed or that you'd like to highlight, and then really help us understand. We're going to make the first question what you're doing for post-COVID, and a look into the future on the trends. So we get that over first, and we'll be talking about the longer term future after that. So I'd first like to start with Krista and ask you a little bit about your journey over the last few months and your approach going forward.
Hi guys, thank you so much for having me, Matt and Melissa. By the way, over the last 4 months, not only have we been planning at Comcast vigorously, we have also learned that "sorry, I'm on mute" is the most common new phrase post-COVID. I will try not to do that today. So my name's Krista Sinker. I am Senior Director of Campus Planning. As Melissa stated, within the last 4 months, we've been very busy, as I'm sure all of you have been that have been involved in this. We started with a lot of programming. So back in the day when I was doing the architectural thing, at the A&E firms, I was a programmer, so I asked a lot of questions. And we started with our senior leaders because this was so new. We didn't know what was going to happen. We came up with a plan, and we are, for those of you who don't know, Comcast is headquartered in Philadelphia. We have about 3 million square feet, 10,000 employees, but we're doing this planning both at HQ and also looking at it across the country. My role is centralized on headquarters because it is very unique since it's a vertical campus in our portfolio. We came up with an approach after all these conversations and programs with a 3-phase plan that's pretty much developing into a 6-phase plan. Everyone was prognosticating, and we didn't know what we didn't know, but we did know that we needed to pilot something, test it, and then get the data before we could ramp up. So currently in Philadelphia, we have about 1% of our population that are considered authorized essential in. We have been mapping the campus both vertically and horizontally because we have elevators to deal with and we don't want bottlenecks. Entryway logistics, again, are very different for those on our campus versus a business park setting. Parking is an issue, mass transit's an issue. Dealing with bikers and commuters, and do we have the right amenities? We're trying to identify those things. Our planning for the next phase, which we're ramping up between now and September 1st, is called Office Optimal Planning. And those are for individuals that are productive at home, but they would be really, really productive, tethered to infrastructure within the campus. We're going to use that 5% as our pilot and learn from that before we ramp up even further. Everyone's saying there might be a resurgence in the fall. So, you know, we know what to do to flex down or flex up right now. And then while we're doing this reactive planning, which is signage and circulation path markers and high intersection markers, sanitization stations, increasing our janitorial, increasing our soft services, we're also looking at the proactive plan because we need to look at what our long-term real estate needs will be. And that will be interesting. There's a lot going on in real estate land. So lease negotiations are happening. You're going to see 1-year leases, 3-year leases be a new standard. So we're doing all that. And I think we're doing it pretty successfully right now. Hope that is it in a nutshell for you guys.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Krista. Evelyn, might you share a little bit about what return to office has been looking like for your organization and some of the things you've been learning?
Yeah, so I almost feel like we're a little bit behind Comcast purely because we are not returning to the office, and we've made that global announcement. Within the last month also, Slack has followed Twitter and Square by saying that we are going to be a remote first company. So we have, right now we have 2,200 employees across 15 offices globally. And we are, for all of those that are able, we are letting our employees decide whether or not they want to be permanent remote workers or come back to the office. So my role as a senior experience designer, which is a very ubiquitous title, it can mean a lot of things, has really been helping a core team look at prototyping the opening of one of our offices. And just saw some comms going out this morning. It was interesting to see how everybody is wanting to get back to the office to collaborate. We are informing our employees that the office will not be a space for collaboration when they come back for their own health and safety to maintain social distancing. But I'm also working across a lot of functions in the office to really decide what our future real estate portfolio is going to look like. Especially with this new remote policy, how are we going to decide where we build future offices? We're not getting rid of our offices, but where we provide those opportunities for our employees to come back together and gather.
Thank you for that, Evelyn. Particularly thinking about your title and experience, any particular areas of focus for that experience or things that you're focused on being challenged by or addressing given this choice of go virtual?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard right now to survey the population and ask them, do you expect to be coming back now, or do you want to be permanently remote for the foreseeable future. The other thing, and which is truly unique about Slack, I think right now, is that we've been growing and hiring through this process, right? So you talk about culture. The CEO mentioned that 20% of our workforce has never seen the inside of one of our offices because we've in fact grown by that much. So I feel, but by the time we get back to the new norm, that's going to be well over 50%. So
Right.
really, what is, establishing the new office culture going forward is going to be a really interesting thing.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And of course, I'm sure a lot of organizations are using Slack just to manage some of their own culture and communication. So really looking forward to seeing how that lands. Abigail, you bring a little bit different perspective. You're obviously you've got return to office for your own organization, but you've been helping tons of customers with their urgent needs and requirements, and maybe have some insights as to what does that future look like, or what has changed, what's on the radar for clients and organizations that are implementing workplace experience technology, and what does that look like from your perspective?
Yes, definitely. So thank you so much for having me first and foremost, Matt and Melissa. As you mentioned, I'm Abby Becker. I'm a customer success manager at Comfy. And for those of you who don't know, Comfy is a Siemens business. It's a SaaS workplace technology platform really built to enable real estate leaders to manage the dynamic workplace on a global portfolio scale. So in my role at Comfy as a customer success manager, which if we think about the other panelists today, operational and design team members and strategists, my role is to really work with these individuals at mainly enterprise Fortune 500 companies on projects where we began the implementation and adoption journey with our technology. So going back to the question around evolution in our clients' thinking, it's a very interesting question, I think, mainly because what I've been talking to clients about over the last 2 years has fundamentally not changed. So our focus is to, and has been, to empower employees with access to the people, spaces, and services they need to be productive and collaborative, as well as support a platform built to enable real estate leaders to really manage the dynamic workplace on a global scale. Are there new specific use cases under this umbrella? Absolutely. Did we predict that PPE pickup stations and dated entry times would be the focus of a lot of our conversations? No, but it is the same underlying technology that this industry has been talking about for years that can deliver value during this period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would maybe reinforce, Abigail. It's one of the findings of that paper that Matt and our team wrote together, which is really our buildings need that smartness of technology now more than ever before. Maybe previously there was 1 or 2 reasons to implement a smart building or a building user experience app. And now there's so many more because of everything from what Evelyn's putting in the chat here about being able to manage and time gauge when people are entering the space, to be able to have room booking that you could use for contact tracing, et cetera. So certainly now more than ever, I think is one of the highlights or headlines that we're hearing. All right, I'm going to pass it. Thank you, each of our panelists, for that opening piece. And I'm going to pass it over to Matt for some next questions.
Sure. So as part of that, I thought maybe we would launch our second poll here. And we'll keep going, but please feel free to take a look at it and answer, and then we'll shut it down and maybe do another one in a little bit. So one of the major factors for us in trying to deal with our clients, and part of the reason we wanted to have this conversation with the group of people here is that, as design professionals, we spend so much of our time trying to come up with recommendations, looking at best practices, talking with people. But maybe there's a time when we need to hear what's working from your end and what you're hearing versus what you need to be hearing from the design community. And so, Krista, one of the things that has been really interesting is that, the number of, if I look in my inbox, and I'm sure you see the same thing now, every single day, the number of emails you get, that's the kind of BuzzFeed 5 things to re-enter the workplace, or, these 3 simple tips to keep your staff safe. And I even see in the chat, a mention of people asking about things like temperature tracing and tracking that we've spent a lot of time researching options for. But as you've tried to wade through all those recommendations and deal with the kind of the pros and cons of too much, too little, what do I do, what can I afford? What have some of the conversations, what have they been as you've been kind of working through that, or what things have you, felt overwhelmed with, can't do, shouldn't do? How are you approaching moving through all of that?
So to back up a little bit, a lot of what we've been doing has been reprioritization. Health and the wellness and the safety of the employee, physically, mentally, that has become a priority. So we always keep that in the forefront of our mind. So as OpEx rises through automation, HVAC, other signage, placement in the building, we're looking to the employee as the most important part here. And that really helps kind of navigate through. At the same time, we're also looking at how can we use what we're learning with that in mind to keep everybody safe while they're coming back into the office. And just like Melissa and Abby mentioned, it's those metrics and the technology that's really going to be critical. So I think you just have to keep your mind on what those priorities are. And again, it's not one size fits all. So my vertical campus is going to be very different than a business park pharmaceutical company that has clean rooms and manufacturing facilities that are already up to spec. So with that, we're kind of taking what those peak priorities are, which are the health and safety, getting the workspace ready, getting all of the items we need to in place, and then looking to see what can we do to metric all of it, test and learn to do a data-driven ramp up. Some of the things we're seeing, and I'm sure Abby, this is kind of what Comfy is doing, is looking at these desk reservation tools. They assist with utilization. They assist with providing these metrics. They're based off of our current IWMS system, which is a facility technology that we use to measure space and people, capacity and occupancy. Food pickup, package deliveries, everything looks a lot different. So we're looking at something that can kind of assist and make it easier for both the employee, the user experience, like Melissa mentioned, and for us to report out on utilization and metrics, because we know that that's going to be the next important thing to do a ramp up that makes sense, that could easily be tracked. So those are kind of, I think you said 5 things, but I probably talked about more than 5, Matt, sorry.
No, that's great. And so, have there been any, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot here, but have there been any kind of conclusions or anything that's come out of the work you've done so far that, when you started discussing it, you expected that you'd be going one direction, and either the act of attempting to implement or collecting information has caused you to kind of take a little bit of an about face? Are you seeing that, or are you seeing that the as you're kind of moving through things, it just stacks one onto the next and the conclusions kind of, get put together in that format?
It's been a true evolution and a journey in that what we did think was going to work, we needed to pivot and go another direction. And doing a lot of that manually, that's why we're looking at metric utilization tools that can help us pivot quicker with this ramp up, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
Entryway logistics, that has morphed. Again, you don't want to have bottlenecks with your elevator bank. So you need to schedule people to come in at a certain time. You can't have everybody scheduled to come in going to elevator bank A. You need to disperse it evenly. And again, public mass transit's really going to help inform that. We don't know what that's going to look like when that is optimal. It's not optimal right now in Philadelphia.
Yeah, living here, I've experienced that for myself.
Right.
So Abby, when hearing that, there's the kind of position of working through lots of different options. There's probably a dozen different ways to skin the cat on the technology side, on the what you collect, how you collect it. You're certainly seeing this conversation play out among a lot of clients all at once. Are you seeing any notable trends? Are you seeing any kind of rules of thumb on how this conversation is developing?
Yes, I would start with just the fact that visibility and transparency is key in all of these discussions. I think it starts with the technology that you're purchasing, understanding what is the value of that piece of information, what data will you be getting from it, and will you be getting the data in a way that you can actually use it. I think we all on this call are familiar with so many of these systems these days coming with a plethora of data dumps of information. It needs to be, very accessible to the end users that we're working with in the technology front for them to be able to use this data. So I think that's one piece of it. Another piece is just keeping in mind the end user, as Krista mentioned, in terms of everything that we're deploying at the moment. We want to make sure that it's supporting the end users in their visit back to the office. So kind of digging into the desk booking functionality that was mentioned, we're seeing a lot of new interest in this. First, so it allows the employee to secure a spot or a touchdown address within the space before ever leaving their home. So allowing them to have that sense of security before leaving to the office is key there. Now, having something like a workplace application allow the end user to better understand what they're going to see when they arrive at the office is important to know. If I've booked a desk, is it physically distanced from a nearby desk? How many other desks have been booked for the day? Allowing the thoughts and wellness of the employees to really come to the front here before they've even left their secure home that they've become so familiar with over the last few months. Now, even zooming out a bit more there, I think, we've checked now the box for a productive location for this employee to work before leaving the home, but how can we support their kind of mental wellness upon going into the office to think about what other services are offered? Are there new amenities? Is there general on-site communication that may have been sent via email that really can be highlighted, localized content? How can we bring that to the forefront to really have a smooth entrance of these employees that, even as Evelyn mentioned, may not have been in the office ever before? So both now you're working with employees who are coming into an environment that they once knew months ago, or employees that have never been in this space before. So adding this visibility and transparency layer of what the new office looks like is key, and that can come in many different forms and functions, whether that's through an app like Comfy or even communications via Slack and things like that.
So are there particular performance criteria, data collection criteria that you've seen as being more valuable? I mean, there's an overwhelming number of things you could do, but for most people, they're just gonna have to start with the first thing. And everything you're talking, is there something that seems to be coming to the top of the pile of what people are asking for or see value in?
Yeah, I would say I think the desk booking, understanding how many employees are really wanting to come into the office is kind of first and foremost what's coming to the front. I think in one of my clients I work with in Tokyo is already moving up to 30% occupancy in one of their buildings, or allowing for 30% of occupants to come back. But what they're seeing is less than a 5% return rate. So I think at that point, you need to, as Krista was mentioning, you need to put these processes in place and then see how they play out from the employee perspective. Just saying that an office is open for 30% doesn't mean that you will see that quick comeback to the office. So how can you iterate on your planning and see what other needs or amenities need to be implemented before an employee can feel safe and secure in the space? So it, again, needs utilization metrics, desk booking metrics, need to be paired with kind of change management programming to understand that employees are feeling safe coming back.
It's interesting you mentioned a client you're working with that's going through this, and we're noticing those exact same metrics in New York, which did attempt to open to a certain percent and saw that sub 10% number.
Right.
Wow. So I know, Melissa, there's some items that you wanted to talk about relative to looking at kind of impact on the design process.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that most recent point, Abigail. I think it's important to recognize that when we were officially at 100% occupancy, that means everyone who had a desk in the space or everyone who used the space was invited to come in. We were often seeing, 50 to 70% utilization at any one time anyway. So I think it's unsurprising that we see these gaps between kind of who might express an interest in coming into the office and who might actually turn up on any one day or moment. I'd also like to quickly answer the question from Mary Victoria Barr asking about software to reserve your desk. I think many of the ways that this is being done is that we're calculating in those social distancing or spatial distancing figures, so that when one desk is booked, that would all automatically block out the adjacent desks if those seats were too close or too proximate for one another. So that was my point about how things are doing double duty, right? And we're maybe even starting to see some of the smart planning or even artificial intelligence. If you pick one space, then other spaces go offline, is beginning to be incorporated. Perfect. So maybe just then thinking, there's maybe two aspects of design going forward. One, design's a creative process. So how are we thinking differently about creative processes now that we're in virtual space, and what are we doing to address that? And then maybe that also ties into how are we thinking differently about kickoff meetings or starting a project when you're really at that nascent or early stage of a process? How is that happening differently? And I might just pick on you again first, Krista, if you don't mind, sharing with us a little bit about what project initiation looks like going forward from your perspective.
And I want to say hi to Mary Victoria. We work with her company a lot in Philadelphia. Well, that's a loaded question, Melissa. So right now, we have not kicked off any new projects except for OpEx types of things such as automation, touchless surfaces, touchless doors, all that type of thing. We are looking, and I think what I would expect if we were to do that, because what I see is group and individual spaces, the percentage of space allocated on a campus to those two categories shrinking. And I see amenity spaces and community spaces expanding. Because I think that when folks come in for this episodic work, project-based work, collaborative work, that's what the new workplace is going to be, in my opinion. And again, we don't know. But I do believe that those are the types of things that will be the focus. And I would expect to work with, the architecture or design firm to kind of come up with, how can this be converted? What's the convertibility factor in this design? Those are the types of questions I think would preface a kickoff. And again, understanding the company's culture, going back to what I said, one size doesn't fit all.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for that. And Evelyn, maybe with your background in architecture and creative processes, you could answer that as well, but also thinking kind of about how that kickoff experience or that get to know you experience might happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that a lot of our casual discourse now has to happen in this realm, right, on video conference, even when it comes to strangers, similar to Krista. So our entire global build and real estate team is on hold. We're looking at a really interesting non-existent sublease market right now in San Francisco. So we aren't really kicking off anything either. What I have been seeing architecture firms, though, do is begin to prototype a lot of different software to kind of come into that creative space where everyone essentially can begin to whiteboard together. And there is a way to structure those meetings where you can do your typical, all the things that you used to do during a project meeting, I still think needs to happen in the virtual space. So an icebreaker, laying out introductions, laying out the agenda, and then some like what the AIA, so I'm on the AIA National Board. We, after our board meetings, we do like a cocktail hour or an afternoon coffee, depending on the time of day, just to kind of decompress and actually keep those personable relationships going. Which unfortunately, I think we can all talk about Zoom fatigue in relationship to that. But But I think similarly to how we balanced our time out in the real world, we also have to be very conscious of also, getting in that more personable time in the virtual space.
Excellent, thanks. And Abigail, maybe you can share a little bit on maybe some changing priorities and things that you might see happening differently. Maybe even that we're briefing technology products at the beginning of a project, not just the building systems and characteristics. So anything that you're seeing moving to the beginning of a project as a result of lessons learned from this COVID moment?
Yeah, I would say, we always like to look at the holistic experience of the employees in the particular office. I think both other panelists spoke to the fact that this localized or cultural component is very important to understand, how does this site function normally and how can we mimic this or really add to it using technology. So I think that there is even more time spent now in this discovery phase. Often folks like myself would go on site and experience the physical space in person. I'm now having those conversations virtually to better understand what type of work is being done in these spaces. What are the different business units on various floors doing? Are they used to walking around the space and having sales conversations in a very lively atmosphere, or is it a very heads down workspace? So I would say it's more some of the physical activities that I used to do on site with employees that could have been solved by clients that could have been solved by just walking around the space are now needing to be done in a more discovery mode, and really digging into what is the culture of this space and how can we ensure that what we're building in a technology like Comfy is really enhancing this, not just adding more information that might not be valuable to the end user. So that discovery phase is very vital, I would say.
And one more thing, Melissa, I've just add the brand expression. I think that's also very important as part of this, because the culture, you want to keep that culture right there. It's so important, especially to Comcast. It's so much a part of everything we do, and it's ingrained in what we do, how we do it. So brand expression, I think, should be another important question. How do you incorporate that throughout?
I think that's a great point. And there's so many, we've gotten so used to, as architects and designers and workplace people, talking about how we express brand through space. And that's been, a really rich conversation for the last decade or so. But it's also important to recognize that there's so many interfaces that are part of a digital experience that brand and culture are expressed through that as well. I mean, you can think of your favorite website or your, best chats with your closest colleagues, or I say, even whether you choose to write your name in the email signature, or if you have it automatically say, thanks and your name, that's just one of those micro transactions every day that's about how we treat each other, that is just as rich through virtual channels as it is through physical channels. And we want to be sensitive about, because that is truly the definition of culture, is the sum of all those instantaneous moments. Alrighty, Matt, I'm going to hand it back to you and see if we've got a couple more questions on this line of thinking.
Yeah, so thanks. It's funny. I think back to early in my career when I used to walk in to meet with a client and say, great, I've seen the building, I've seen the pieces, parts, where do I need to put the technology? It was a very building first, then you wrap the users into it afterwards. And I'm so grateful either through my own experience in life, or whether this is just the way that the entire market has shifted. But we spend a lot more time now thinking about how the user impacts the building versus the other way around. And so one of those things I think is interesting, and I kind of I'd like to start with Evelyn. You made that question or that comment pretty early on that I think is really big, about the idea that, at least for a moment in time, if not longer, that your workplace is not necessarily for collaboration. It's more of a heads down environment, and environments like this are how we collaborate. That's a very specific value decision on the use of space, and one that we're all going to need to be very clear on at the beginning of a project. What is the client's value? Was there kind of was there a change in that thought pattern? Was that pretty early on, and how do you see that potentially changing, or do you see that kind of digging in further down the line?
No, so I would say that this is how we're looking at space pre-therapeutic, pre-vaccine, amongst everything that we're going through right now. So we've done our own occupancy and planning around our spaces, looking at max COVID occupancy. For the pilot, we are asking our employees to go out and clear out all of their desk spaces. And we're literally piloting what is going to ultimately be, I think, a 5 to 7% occupancy of the space over 6 weeks, just to see with a lot of polling of those occupants to see, what they are, if they are getting any benefit out of this space. It is quite a different space, and everybody who wants to get back to the office, like your poll was saying, was for collaboration. We just don't see that happening very safely right now. So I think everybody has their own ideas of even the plexiglass walls, but we've begun to even refer to that as kind of safety theater, right? This notion that the plexiglass is actually makes, like, now I cannot wear a mask, now we can be closer together and interact. One, like from an operational standpoint, I was like, that is so many more surfaces you have to wipe down and clean and sanitize. But also, like really, I mean, and we all know at a very high level how HVAC works. Like, if you sneeze or something, it's going to be transmitted outside and above and beyond that. So we have really spaced out our offices, looking at max COVID capacity. Like, most of our offices will not hit more than 25% for the foreseeable future. And until we can ensure the safety of our employees, that's just going to be our offices for the foreseeable future. Beyond that, I am working with groups like Melissa's, with architecture firms, the research arms of our architecture firms, and then the research arms of large design furniture manufacturers, to understand what they're thinking of the future of the office is going to be. And it's not different from what Krista is saying, like, right? It's really, I think, going to be more collaboratively based. We have one-to-one desking right now. Prior to that, we were looking at potentially hoteling, because we only have on average 50% utilization of our offices going forward. The survey that we just got back from our employees, of those that are coming into the office, 60% said that they only plan on coming into the office 3 days a week. So, and it's mostly for collaboration, even in a world like San Francisco, where you think people might want to get away from their roommates, or they just have smaller houses that they're trying to vacate to get to the office for private space. The survey resoundingly said it was for collaboration. So I do see that shift. I don't think Slack is going to make any changes, like big physical building changes, building projects out of reconfiguring our current offices. I think we're going to be very conscientious of how we do real estate planning going forward, and then what furniture changes can we make within our existing space to begin to adapt our current offices.
It's a notable shift, yeah. Krista, I mean, kind of coming from almost the other direction, Comcast Technology Center finished in the last couple of years. A significant square footage, all open office with, or open floor plan with 0 offices, lots of huddle rooms. We've had this conversation in the past. Is right now, is open plan a liability, or is it potentially an asset if it has a level of flexibility built into it? How are you seeing it?
Well, again, we're going to find out. That was built and constructed with a 1-to-1 ratio of employee to desk, someplace to work, whether it was a collaboration space. Again, like I said before, I think that the reason people will be coming back in is for connection, innovation, and co-creation. And I think we'll have to just wait and see. I think that convertibility of space, like larger conference rooms, may be used for project-based work now. They may not be bookable. There's a couple of different things that we have to look at. And the other thing I think is going to be how we measure it, like I said, but I think their priorities are going to shift there. Peak and average attendance ratios, I think, are going to be important to know, especially on our campus. We'll have to issue more pulse surveys to see how that goes in that open workplace. Right now, we just did occupancy modeling on our own. We know we could do it safely based on those that have been deemed office optimal. You're going to see net promoter scores again for how the workplace policies and practices are working. And probably another thing that will become important once that 5% ramp up happens is active real-time occupancy and density with some type of alert, and for the benefit of contact tracing moving forward. I think those types of things will determine what the consensus is on that, Matt.
Yeah, certainly what that experience is going through that on your day-to-day life.
Right.
So I think now is a good time. I'll launch our next poll on kind of looking at the opposite side. What aspects of remote work have been, unique for you, or discoveries you've made? Melissa, I know we wanted to kind of take this conversation now and look at the future and where things are going and what we could learn from what's happened. I think there's a few items that you wanted to hit.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I wanted to ask Krista, I'm sorry if I missed it previously, but could you confirm how that office optimal was determined in terms of the employee themselves versus management versus maybe peers? Kind of how did you get that figured out? Because I'm sure that's a challenging issue for many.
It is, and it was a three-phased approach. First, the interviews with senior leadership happened to determine if the job functionality was deemed optimal. And back to that definition, it's optimal are those individuals that are more productive, tethered to infrastructure on the campus. So they thought about the ecosystem of the workplace. How does it drive success for those individuals? That was phase one. Individuals were then contacted to see if they had specific accommodations. So through people leaders, not through surveys, through people leaders, they were contacted to see if they had immunocompromised family members, if they needed childcare and weren't able to return. Those things were had. And so we got multiple lists that we had to scrub to do the mapping and modeling for the campus once all those questions were asked. And we thought that it was most important to do it personally and not send out surveys.
Right. Great, I appreciate that, and it sounds like better than best practice. So I'm sure that will be great for everyone to hear. We've only got about 10 minutes left, and I think that teleworking best practice says to give everyone a little bit of a break between sessions. So I'm going to do just one last question here, I think, before we do close out. One of the things we've been saying is the companies that learn the most from this period of time will be the ones that are most successful in the next few years. From a workplace, culture, technology perspective, I mean, this is a true rethink of all the things that we think of as the tools of business for the knowledge economy. And of course, we're all terrifically grateful to be in that knowledge economy and to be able to have jobs that we can sit around and talk about being located in different places or to be done virtually going forward, because we recognize there's so many people who don't have that privilege. But if you could talk a little bit each about what you are hoping we bring forward into that future work environment, right? So as we either move back into the offices or rethink the office or redefine, as Evelyn said, virtual first as a hiring mechanism, what are the things that you're most hoping are the knowledge and thoughts and learning takeaways from this grand experiment that will help drive us into the future? And if you don't mind, I'll let Krista off the hook to not be the first one this time and ask you, Evelyn, if you could talk a little bit about what are the most important things that we bring forward into the workplace of the future.
Well, Krista talked about, the culture at Comcast being so quintessential to who they are. I think Slack is one of, not to steal a term from Disney, who is probably not the happiest place right now, but the people in Slack and the community there, I've never worked with such gracious, humble, hardworking individuals. So, how do we encapsulate that both virtually as we do physically. I think there's going to, there's going to be a conscientiousness, especially with our group moving forward. We had distributed team, like even if we weren't entirely remote, because we are a global workforce, we had distributed teams already. So, if one person on your team is distributed, then I feel like the entire team has to act as if, and from an equity standpoint, if you are 4 people in person in one office, what is that experience for that one person that's calling in? We've even debated, and Spotify did this before they went remote too, having calls like this, even if you're 3 people in the office and 2 people remote, so that equity is still maintained. So small shifts like that, but also when you do come together for collaboration, then what do those spaces have to look like? I feel like, Melissa, you're probably used to running innovation sprints. I think a lot more firms are used to looking at like, what does a 1 or 2 day sprint have to look like? But like, what are the spaces that we design that makes those like those short days together really super highly efficient and productive? But also, what do those spaces look like when those collaborations aren't happening? So really interesting, highly functional multi-use space that also future-proofs our office, so like as we go forward.
That's great. Thank you, Evelyn. Yeah, one of the things I've been hearing a lot about is kind of shifts in spatial hierarchy. When you're in the physical office tells you whether you're the boss or the one that should be listening or listened to. There's so much of that kind of social structure built into our spaces, and there is an opportunity in this virtual world to be more democratic, to be more egalitarian or flat in hierarchy, and giving more space to people to communicate. And maybe that's one of those things that the blended physical digital environment as we go forward is looking to address. So thank you so much.
And I just want to tag on one real thing, because Matthew jumped in here with like, it's really important. But even thinking about that from a career pathing standpoint, right? Like usually if the boss shows up in the office, those are the days that everyone comes into the office. So without that physical breakdown, how do you ensure career pathing for everyone, whether they are able to physically show up or not?
Right. I guess that's a great point to end on a necessary rethink. Okay, we're gonna let you do the anchor leg. So let's, Krista, so let's first go to Abigail.
Yeah, I would say from my perspective, I think one piece that's been very exciting throughout all of this is just collaboration in general, whether it's on site and different teams working together, or different vendors in the space. So I know I've had many more introductions to vendors or partners that were already live in some of the buildings or structures I've been working with, but really this open idea of how can we layer our data, how can we share what we've learned to make this space better for the humans that will be within it, has been very exciting. So I'm looking forward to more of that collaboration, open APIs, partnerships from companies that really excel in one area, allowing others that have, a different focus to work together for this, outcome of positivity for everyone in this space. So I think that co-collaboration piece is something I hope continues both on the vendor side as well as the in-building stakeholder side.
Excellent. Thank you, Abigail. And over to Krista. What should we be taking with us going forward into the future of work that we've learned in this process?
So I have to say that I agree with everyone, Evelyn, Abby, Melissa, everything that you said. And I think that keeping all that in mind, the way that we're working as actual humans and people with our people that are basically competitors or others, we are coming together. And it's something that I really like to see, which leads to, the we versus the me, and that's on every level. But because of that, we're bouncing these great ideas off each other, and we're doing critical thinking and creative problem solving throughout on every level. And that's something I'm really excited about. That's kind of how I operate. So I like to see that it's been subscribed to on a larger basis, which is great.
Excellent. Thank you. Over to you, Matt, to close things out. And thank you so
Sure.
much to Bala for hosting.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone for joining us. This is not a conversation that's going to end anytime soon. And from the hours and hours of conversations that have happened that have led up to this one that everyone hasn't been able to be a part of, I think there's one takeaway that it's worth bringing out. And this is not something we worked out, but is absolutely something that's been key in all these conversations, which is that COVID and everything that's come from it. If you look at it as a change agent, you're only going to be reacting to the impact that you see from COVID itself. But if you look at it instead as an accelerant, as something that is speeding up plans that very often you already had in place, or things that you wanted to do but didn't have the right funding, willpower, or business case for. I think we look back on a lot of the work we're doing now, minus some of the very specific safety measures, that we're going to see that these are things that we could have been doing and should be doing in the future. And that we really should look at taking this opportunity and understanding the disruption that's coming from what's happened is really showing that when we can align an entire business, and not just the business side, but the users, towards an external force, this idea of something that's outside of the business that's impacting all of us, so we all rally together, versus the idea of something that's being enforced upon us as a place we'd like to go or a direction we'd like to have. But when we can really reinforce this as a way that the entire business can push together, it's incredibly powerful how fast we can move. And I think nothing shows that more than that Monday when most of us split from our offices, and by Tuesday, many of us were still looking at each other just like we are now. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending. We're gonna end right on time. We will make sure to reshare out these results with everyone that attended on the polls. We'll make sure to get your AIA information. And again, thank you. And if there's any follow-up questions, please feel to reach out to Melissa and myself. We'll send a thank you email to everyone afterwards with our information. Thanks, everybody.